Welcome to the summit, where stakeholders reason together for the progress of Nigeria. We are revisiting the matter of the failure of providers of products and services to give Nigerian consumers adequate values for their money. I'm Shola Ajay. The topic is value for money in telecommunications, and the focus is telephony. First, let's take a look at what it used to be in the past to get to what it is today.
The history of telephony in Nigeria dates back to 1958 with the establishment of the Nigerian Telecommunications Limited, just 2 years before Nigeria's independence from Britain. The company was commonly known by its acronym NITEL. It was a monopoly controlled by the British Colonial Authority, and consumers were limited to the services of NITEL. The monopoly continued under the Nigerian federal government after independence from Britain. And like any other market monopoly, the Nigerian telecommunication industry was bedeviled by various flaws. The primary problem being acute shortage or scarcity of telephone lines. This was due to limited investment and weak infrastructure base. NITEL services were concentrated mostly in select urban centers, and the few available private lines were the preserve of the rich and powerful Nigerians who had the privilege and funds to acquire them. Privileged or not, however, the waiting period to acquire a line was long, often as long as 1 whole year after application. And when you finally acquired the line, the service was extremely poor. From inception in 1958 to the arrival of the Global System for Mobile Communication on August 6, 2001, NITEL was able to provide a mere 450,000 subscriber lines for a population of over 150 million people. The non-privileged masses had to travel long distances to queue for hours at the limited NITEL call centers in order to make calls. In November 1992, Nigerian Communications Commission, or NCC, was established by law to pave the way for the liberalization of the entire communications industry. Inaugurated to commence operations in mid-1993, NCC was mandated to regulate activities of the industry. 7 years after inauguration, it released the Nigerian Telecommunications Policy, or NTP, in the year 2000. It then commenced its important duty of liberalization and reformation of Nigeria's telecommunications industry. Subsequently, 2G digital mobile licenses were auctioned in January 2001 to 4 initial private providers of global system for mobile communication, commonly known as GSM. The successful bidders were Airtel, Globalcom, MTN, Etisalat. Among them, only Globalcom is an indigenous company. The others are foreign multinational companies that fulfill the requirements of the Nigerian law to involve Nigerians. In 2002, regional and national fixed wireless access or FWA telephone carriers were also licensed to commence operations. In addition, Nigeria also has companies that provide varieties of what is commonly known as landline or home telephones. With the liberalization of the telecommunication industry, today is far cry from the pre-liberalization era. Nigerians now have easy access to telephony, and the services are much better than the terrible old days of NITEL monopoly. It goes without saying that the liberalization has gone a very long way in reshaping Nigeria's society and economy for the better in many ways, including business, political, cultural, and social upliftment. However, Nigerian telephone services do not compare favorably to the rest of the world, and Nigerian consumers are behind in receiving value for their money spent on telephone services. Social commentators have opined that the seeming lack of the capacity of the Nigerian society to sustain good things has bedeviled the nation's telephony system. Rather than improve, the services of the new Nigerian telephone industry with the global technological innovations has continued to deteriorate since inception, to the chagrin of consumers and consternation of the government regulators. The value shortfalls include poor network and poor quality of services, call drop, high tariffs, billing irregularities, and poor customer relations, to name just a few. What makes this so grievous is that the multinational telephone companies are violating these consumer rights in Nigeria, which they will not dare in other countries where they operate. For instance, some critics allege that the providers tend to deploy substandard equipment in the Nigerian market. And to crown it all, the operators are accused of engaging in all manners of sharp practices to defraud consumers.
You're welcome once again. We are talking about the violation of rights of consumers by providers of telephony in Nigeria. The issues to address have been outlined, and as usual, I have competent personalities to discuss them. With me today, I have three gentlemen. One does not need any introduction, but I'm still going to introduce him anyway. The other two gentlemen, one is a social commentator, and the other is the executive director of Save the Consumer Initiative. It's an NGO. So Aliyu Ilyas is executive director of Save the Consumer Initiative. Then we have the social commentator, that is Mr. Kingsley Agbonoga. And we have Babatunde Irukera, the DG of the Consumer Protection Council. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
You will agree with me that this subject is one that is so hot that Nigerians want some explanation. Of course, we try to, when you talk about telecommunications in Nigeria, you have to involve the regulator. Unfortunately, we had a clash in scheduling, so I believe he left before we could record. What is critical, very critical, is have the telcos in Nigeria gotten too colossal to be regulated? Do Nigerians continue to accept exactly what they are getting? A lot of improper billings. You have calls which are dropped almost irregularly. And you also have, it's like comparing it to the days of the analog, where you have to dial more than 3-4 times in certain cases to be able to get your call completed. I would like to begin with the DG Consumer Protection Council. It is, it's so painful that many of these telcos who operate in Nigeria will not be able to get away with the level, with the quality of service that Nigerians are getting. What exactly is going on? Is it that they are too big to be regulated? Unfortunately, these are questions I had for the regulator. You will see a lot of these questions as we progress. What exactly is going on? Because I know you have an onslaught of complaints about the telcos.
Well, that is correct, and thanks for inviting the Consumer Protection Council again. If you look at the consumer space in Nigeria or how the market operates, then it's a no-brainer that you come to the conclusion of asking the question about whether operators, whether it's in telecommunications or other industries, whether operators are too large to be regulated. It's really because of how abusive the market space is. But the reality of it is that there's absolutely no one too large to be regulated. And it's almost like asking if there's certain aircraft that are too large to fly in the sky. Because what it is that with every flight, you have a flight plan, and you've got communication as you go. You're handed over to different authorities as you fly across the world. And so they tell you to maintain a certain path, they tell you to maintain a certain altitude. And so that's really what regulation is. Or equivalent of a train, the tracks. Doesn't matter what the size of a train is, it would have to run on the tracks. And that's what a regulatory framework is supposed to be. It's supposed to be clear, it's supposed to be stable, it's supposed to be firm. And to the extent that we can continue to hold operators accountable to that type of a regulatory framework, size would not be a factor at all. Now, with respect to the telecommunications industry, you did mention, or you see, at least you indicated that we receive an onslaught of complaints. That is correct. We, at the Consumer Protection Council, receive an incredible number of complaints with respect to telecommunications. There was a time when it was the highest. It's not the highest now, but it's still is one of the highest.
Out of curiosity, which one is the highest?
We receive a lot more complaints with respect to electricity now.
Whoa, okay.
Than we receive with respect to telecommunications. But yes, telecommunications still constitutes one of the higher industries where the complaints exist. And I think the issues are not that many. It's really about how we can really get arms around them. And I'm not going to speak to the other regulatory areas like quality of service, network integrity, because we really don't have that jurisdiction, and it's not within our scope, even though they ultimately have implications in consumer service or consumer protection. But with respect to things like transparent billing, whether people are getting what they paid for on solicited subscriptions, and whether the telecommunications companies themselves are complying with existing regulations, with how to treat consumers when the quality of service falls between a certain level, for instance, with your dropped calls, or very importantly, is when people subscribe to a certain period of time of data, for instance, and for 2 or 3 days, right, there's absolutely no service. And so do they get credit for that time that they do not get the data, or what happens with automatic rollovers, and a bunch of different things. More recently, we're beginning to get complaints about what might be called disparate treatment, with the telcos rolling out better technology, 4G and all that.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. Let me pull in the Executive Director for the Save the Consumer Initiative. What has been your own experience, especially as it relates to the telcos?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting us. The first challenge is there's no value for money. And more so, the right of consumers has been breached to an extent that we do not know who and where to really complain to. Simply because this thing has been occurring over time and no solution to that. Billings, you know, when most consumers, what we do is we actually know the amount we expended, but the value for it cannot be measured. So most time our challenge is that when I subscribe for, the only thing you can measure among the telcos is only the SMS. Because once you send it, you see 4 naira. And you are sure that this is 4 naira. Apart from that, all that services, you can't even measure it. The data, you know, the calls, you can't measure them. And we need transparency in this area. So I think Nigeria is paying a lot for this. And I think the regulatory body, NCC in particular, are more servicing the telcos more than the consumers. And the major reason of them being there is to make sure that customers get value for money. And perhaps these days you go to all these telecom companies, you pay for what you are not even informed about. Simple thing that is just happening these days, that for you to upgrade from 3G to 4G, you need to pay. And you pay to the tune of 2,150 naira. We ask these telecos, is this for data? Is this for call card? Or what for? Just for you to upgrade. Then what are they there for?
Okay. You know, as I bring in Brother Kingsley, I had an opportunity to interact with the Public Affairs Department at NCC. One of the things that I was told is that a lot of these telcos are under financial stress. Is it possible that because of the predicament they find themselves financially, that they have resolved into all these strange activities like the kind of billings that he's talking about?
What kind of financial stress are
they? They're financially stressed.
Do they publish their accounts from year to year? Are they listed in Nigeria Stock Exchange? To my knowledge, I don't know if any of them is listed in Nigeria Stock Exchange, where Nigerians can go there and buy shares and say this is our company. So we don't know their accounting, so we don't know what they are going through and what they are not going through. That's number one. They are providing services, and that's what they told us. They should provide the service. That's number one. Number two, we also need to know act that sets up, first of all, NCC, because most of the consumers don't know acts that set up these organizations. So sometimes they don't even know what is due to them and what is not due to them. So we have to see it from those perspectives as well. Then we now know what is our rights too, because sometimes we can even be asking for what is not our right. And we're asking for it because we don't know. So we need knowledge in those areas. I will really admonish the CPC to let us also have a preview of what the consumers are entitled to, because I can be complaining about something and I may not be entitled to it. So from them saying that they're under a particular stuff, we don't know that.
My question is, if Nigerian telcos are stressed, and you just brought up a point that their financial accounting are not published, how do we justify that claim that they are stressed in any way? Do you see where I'm coming from?
To my own little economic knowledge, one of the telcos have gone through processes that would have thought that they would have gone under is Econet to V-Mobile, V-Mobile to Airtel, you know, and whatever they are now. But they've not gone under.
Okay.
We've seen economic systems of companies that they took over or that they went under, they declared for bankruptcy. They've not gone like that. If they were not in the plus, I don't think anybody would have loved to go and invest there. And I don't think they would have been up till today if they were that bad. Now, having said all that, we also know from our knowledge that a lot of all these changes that we see from Airtel and from Etisalat as it is because they don't want to tell us the whole truth. Sometimes it boils to politics and not just the economy.
By the way, Brother Tunde, you all need to know we invited Glo, we invited MTN, we invited Airtel. Not a single one appeared. Nor did they give us a cogent reason why they could not show up. One would have expected, that one of them would show up to educate everybody about really what they're going through. You know, my role is not to support anybody, but to get at the truth. We're not saying that there are no reasons why there's poor performance, but it would have been good to hear from the horse's mouth to say, what are the challenges?
Well, again, I'm a consumer protector, so I certainly won't speak for the telcos. The NCC covers a lot of that space, so I won't speak on behalf of another regulator also. But I know some of what the complaints are. I know that the telecommunications companies repeatedly complain about infrastructure deficits, and you've identified some of that: security, power, and then sometimes even what is considered a regulatory bottleneck, because they're dealing with different regulators at different levels, sometimes at state level, sometimes even at local government level, right of way sometimes for building their network and improving the infrastructure so that the quality of service is better. So we recognize all of that. We recognize all of that. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, telecommunications in Nigeria today is entirely privatized. There's absolutely no government participation. So and like someone said, there are private companies. And so I cannot possibly find any conceivable explanation for why a private company operating in an environment, in a free market, would justify any poor service or any consumer violations or grievances on account of infrastructure or other deficits. I mean, I don't dispute that they exist, and I do not deny the fact that they are problematic. But by the same token, you figured a tariff system that allows you to operate. The cost of business includes whatever it costs you. As you were, telecommunication services in Nigeria are not the cheapest in the world. And so in some sense, there's already some allowance for whatever the infrastructure deficits or challenges that exist. Maybe not for all, but certainly for some.
Let's look at something else they complain about. The unholy tax regimes in the various stages of government. The state governments, from what we're told, sometimes ask them, they see them as cash cows. They overbuild as telcos. Local government, they do exactly the same thing. Threatening their workers, threatening to shut them down, etc. When we come back, I would like for you to address, again, I think Babatunde has just mentioned there is no excuse for not providing proper service, because that's already been factored into your doing of business. You're doing business.
It is one thing to have faulty equipment and poor service delivery. And what the provider does when the failure happens is a whole different matter. When we return after this message.
Nigerian women are the ones who build this economy from the bottom to the top.
Gender Agenda, every Saturday at 1 p.m. with Adora Onyechere.
When telephone services fall below expectation in other markets, especially for long periods, the providers take responsibility and compensate the consumers for the failure. How responsible and repentant are the providers in Nigeria to the Nigerian consumers when their services go below standard?
Wouldn't you say that maybe there is a conflict of interest situation between how the regulator is funded and the role the regulator has to play in order to regulate the industry?
You know, and that's a very interesting question, and I get that a lot of times. But the way the regulatory space is set up, if it works effectively, it will address and check this point you're making. The Consumer Protection Council, at least with respect to consumer protection issues, doesn't license anyone. We don't have any constituency other than the consumers. Yes, you can say with sector regulators, they are licensors, and operators are their licensees, and they're all, and many of these sector regulators earn their living by what they earn from the regulatory space. And so the system is set up in such a way that a potential conflict or regulatory capture between a sector regulator and an operator in that sector will be checkmated by a consumer protection regulator who doesn't have any constituency. And that's why in every sector we come at it purely and simply from what is in the best interest of the consumer. But the partnership that exists between the Consumer Protection Council and each sector regulator ultimately provides the balance. I'll give you a quick example.
Okay.
For instance, in aviation, I know that there was a time where the Consumer Protection Council was very aggressive about how, the length of delays that passengers were experiencing. And there are regulations about what you must do once the delay is more than 30 minutes, once it's more than an hour. But the sector regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority, who also has a consumer protection department, engaged and said, listen, there are a few problems. We're ferrying aviation jet A fuel from the jetties in Apapa and ferrying it to the airport because the pipelines that allow you to fuel the aircraft from the tarmacs are broken. And so there's construction going on that road. So there's a significant logistic challenge here. And so in that space, we were able to come to some kind of an understanding for what was in the best interest of the consumers, and also provided the appropriate latitude for the airlines to still operate. And so it's that kind of mutual engagement and cooperation that provides the best possible regulatory framework.
Sorry, before we really continue, can we take a quick break?
Nigerian women are the ones who build this economy from the bottom to the top.
Gender Agenda, every Saturday at 1 p.m. with Adora Onyechere.
Yes. So we are talking about Nigerian consumers as it relates to the quality of service that we get from telecom companies, etc. Now, without having to go down the line in terms of all the egregious problems that we run into in the telecom industry right now, I'd like to know, what does your organization do? Save the Consumer Initiative. Okay.
Thank you so much. The main objective of Save the Consumers is to educate and protect the consumers. Inform the consumers of what is on and how they can really defend themselves against this. We educate them. For instance, a lot of issues are happening in telecos that has to do with compensations. And these are what we are looking at. Most time in telecos, the regulatory body finds these telecos. We are saying no, do not find them. Let them use that to compensate the customers. You find them 500 million naira at the expense of the consumers. No, the consumers should have this. So what we are just telling them over time is that don't find this organization. Tell them to compensate consumers. For instance, we have issues of with is it Entel? No service for 4 days, no SMS for apologies, no emails, nothing. Do you know what people have gone through? Do you know what they lose? So these are what we are saying, that please, there should be compensation for people. Ideally, there will be service break. Yes, acknowledge there is service break. 2, acknowledge it and compensate people duly. We are not saying you are perfect. Yes, we understand you complain about infrastructure, lack of security, and what have you. Yes, but after any service break, compensate Nigerians for it.
Do you, I mean, sorry, I'll come back to you in 2 seconds. Do you get the same?
No, I get.
Do you agree with this?
I get the point, but I differ slightly. There are two components here, and that is a penalty, which is a fine, and then the compensation. They're two different things. A fine or a penalty is punitive.
It's punitive.
It is retribution for inappropriate conduct. And I think it's important. It serves as a deterrent from people continuing to engage. It's a consequence management tool. However, the point that Save the Consumer makes is a very vital point. That whatever the conduct that results in penalty, if there's been an injury to someone, a simple law. When you create an injury, you must compensate for the injury.
Absolutely.
And so I agree with the Save the Consumer.
So you are saying both are necessary, both the punitive and also the compensation.
Not necessarily, both are imperatives.
Imperatives. Now we know where you're coming from. When it comes to the perception out there, you know, I know a lot of the people that you work with, even in your, as a pastor, some of the greatest complaints that people have, things that have to do with some of those value-added services. You're talking about you ending up with music you never subscribed to, all forms of, you know, in my particular situation, there's a security tip I'm sent every day or two, and I'm told that there's been a successful renewal of my service. I don't even remember subscribing to it. Talk less of having to renew it.
You see, it's all apart from the entities, I think there's the lottery organization that's supposed to control some of those things, because they do a lot of lottery stuff on the phone. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, we've seen
where
that.
They say
questions.
You're playing for this one.
Right.
It costs 100 naira.
Right.
And there's a particular time, I remember that the lottery organization came up and said, no lottery. But the telco still kept on doing this. And we never knew any penalty that went with that. Now, you told me I subscribed for something. And you said, if I want to unsubscribe, text something to something, and I text it, you say service is not available at that particular time. But you never told me service was available when you subscribed me home. And you were taking 50 naira from me every week. Right? It's unacceptable to me and to the consumers. It's unacceptable. And these are things that the CPC also needs to look at. You see, we know that they have a regulator, but also we have the consumer to protect, which is the work of the CPC. And if they have these complaints should be channeled straight. Well, that's why I said we don't also know the acts that set them up. You see, we need to be aware. You see, if I know the act that set NEPA up or the discourse, I know how to deal with them. One time they came to my compound and took my light. I went to the act, read it, and I found out that no NEPA official or whatever they are called today is supposed to climb the pole to cut it off. So I went to the police with my act in my hand, and I got them arrested. No, seriously.
That's good.
That's
been proactive.
Oh, yes. And because one of my friends sent me the act that set up ADC and said that they're supposed to bring warning and warning and warning for 3 months. And I said, really? I said, yes. Give me the act. He sent the act by WhatsApp to me. And I read the whole act, boy.
And you marched it.
I marched it.
Well, information is always key.
Absolutely.
And one of the key roles, the statutory functions of the Consumer Protection Council is also to educate consumers.
Yes.
Now, the one thing the one point that you make, though, is a very sensitive issue about how regulators work together so that there's stability. The consumers recognize how the system works. Operators recognize how the system works. And we are doing the best we can. Right now we're in the process of hopefully concluding negotiations of a more robust and expanded MOU with the Nigerian Communications Commission. As a matter of fact, we've held up a major investigation into the telcos, which investigation would address quite a number of the issues that have been raised in this conversation. And we've held it up. One of the reasons why the investigation has been held up is that we're trying to gain this alignment in how we would proceed in a clear, transparent, and respectful manner in a joint investigation with the Communications Commission. And we're hopeful the engagement and the exchanges continue. We're hopeful that that would happen. But we understand the aggravation, and we're hopeful that we'll get to that point very soon.
But at what point? I mean, I'm curious here, because when some of the people knew that we were going to be doing a show about the telcos, there was a question I was asked, and which I was hoping to ask you. At what point do some of these actions border on criminality?
And at what extent did they go?
Exactly.
To punish them.
Correct.
Well, to determine what is a crime is a matter of law. And so the law would clearly state what is a crime, and then there will be elements of a crime. The one area where you've got to be very careful about criminal conduct is commerce. Generally, all over the world, there's a respect and regard for commerce being an objective. And so criminal conduct is not necessarily the default assumption or the default permutation of conduct in the context of commerce. Now, does it exclude criminal conduct from commerce? No. For instance, in the Consumer Protection Council Act, it's very clear there that misleading advertisement, when you directly, purposefully, intentionally advertise to mislead,
yes.
When the original purpose of your conduct itself was to extort money for the wrong purpose, and that's criminal conduct. And so you just look at what the elements are, and there's prosecutorial right there. Under our law, what we do is to refer what we perceive as criminal conduct to the Office of the Attorney General for prosecution. Apart from that, with respect to investigations, if we can carry out our investigations and come to a point where we think that criminal conduct is implicated. And we would look to the right law enforcement authority. It might be the EFCC, might be the Nigerian police, but whatever the appropriate additional law enforcement authorities, we will partner with them. And we have understandings with all of them.
There's a case in Germany recently that we can take a cue from. Volkswagen was just fined $1.2 billion.
That's correct.
For lying about their emission status concerning their cars.
That's correct.
And they're obliged to pay because they lied, because an investigation was set up. I wonder why MTN were trying to remove their neck for not paying what they were supposed to pay when they were fined by NCC. Till today, we don't know if they paid or not.
Well, that was on the news yesterday.
Oh, was it?
It seems to have, I mean, the Attorney General, after the Federal Executive Council meeting, addressed that point. I think what must have happened is that the fine was renegotiated and there was a mutual acceptance of what was the appropriate fine. And what the Attorney General must have done was to submit that before the Federal Executive Council, and it was approved yesterday. So, and it is not uncommon. I mean, I can understand.
Correct.
It is not uncommon
Correct.
that a fine is renegotiated, and even criminal penalties. Sometimes, if you're not prosecuting a case, if you're not trying a case to the end, you plea bargain, where some factors come into play, and then you determine what the penalty should be based on the consideration of those different factors. So I would not, I mean, but to speak to what happened with Volkswagen in Germany, again, it's really how we can get the regulators in Nigeria to build our capacity to a point where we have this investigative capacity and to understand the full scope of our legislation and our laws. All over the world, regulators are always aching to interpret or construe their powers broadly.
Correct.
It's only the judicial process that narrows it down. And so one challenge that I have experienced in the period that I've been in a regulatory position is that sometimes greater knowledge and more sophistication exists in the industry than in the regulator, and that's a fundamental problem, because the regulator must be as knowledgeable, if not even more knowledgeable than the issue.
One thing we should look at is I've attended, and we have attended several consumer forums organized by NCC. This problem keep occurring. Nigerians keep saying this, the same complaint every over 3 years. The same thing. So what is happening that they cannot address the particular issues, and let's move on to the other one. So the same thing you address in Abuja, the same thing you address in the northeast, the same thing you address in the southwest. So what is the lasting solution? I think there should be a lasting solution to it.
Let me tell you what I feel about those forums. I think it's a charade. I think so. My personal opinion. I think it's a charade just to say they held a consumer forum where the consumers could talk. If you can analyze, articulate, and inject the consumers' complaints back into the system over and over again that it has taken place, I think it's a charade, and I think it doesn't work. Then secondly, you talked about the taxation system.
Correct.
Now, I'm not an economist in that aspect, but I think Nigerian tax system is one of the most mildest tax system in the world, whether it's from the federal to the states to the local government. I think we have the mildest tax system in the world.
But could it be, sorry, could it be as a result of the tax regimes not being clearly defined? So people become, or rather these local governments, state government, become creative in their own ways in order to be able to get what they think belongs to them.
Well, actually, I started out agreeing with you, but we're not at the same end. Without question, the tax regime in Nigeria is not the worst. And one thing I know about multinationals is that they operate in far more stringent regulatory environments than Nigeria. Because they're more, not necessarily even in parent
anywhere
country.
They operate.
They're operating in multiple countries.
Correct.
Sometimes in their parent country, sometimes that's not the case. But it's a sing-song for businesses. Oh, we're over-regulated, the regulations are too much. That's okay. But none of them has ever gotten away. None of them has ever said, because of regulation,
we are moving out.
No. And the reality of it, and that's one of the successes of this administration with the Presidential Enabling Business Council and the Ease of Doing Business Secretariat, and of course all the work they've done that has increased or that has really taken us up on the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. Yeah. What companies want far more is regulatory clarity, stability, and predictability.
That is exactly what I was driving at, which I agree with you wholeheartedly. Hold that thought. When we come back, there's a particular problem, a particular practice now, especially for those of us or those of you who have relatives or do business with overseas companies, the masking of calls. When we come back, I want us to address that.
Nigerian women are the ones who build this economy from the bottom to the top.
Gender Agenda, every Saturday at 1 p.m. with Adora Onyenchere.
Yes, welcome back. The issue of Nigerian telecommunications being at doldrums, I think, is something that we're talking about. There is a current problem in the industry where many subscribers receive overseas calls, and these calls, which I refer to as masking, do not reflect the numbers of those who are calling from overseas, but they are local calls. In my understanding from NCC, which they said it's illegal and that the security operatives are after the people who set up this mechanism to be able to have these calls terminated by the overseas companies. What is your take on this?
Thank you for that. Most consumer forum that has been organized by these are the questions people raised. Even within Nigeria, you receive some SMS, some messages that send your BVN numbers, send this, send that to them. I think NCC can also unravel and get to know who is this, who are these persons. Doesn't mean you do not register these lines. And more so for the international calls, it's just like normal thing now. People will be in their house, and I don't know how they get to do it, hold it, and as if they are calling from America or London or what have you. So I think it's their responsibility to work on this and ban. If you can do not disturb me, DND, why don't you work on this also and make sure it is effective?
DG?
Well, call masking, apparently, from my understanding and engagement with NCC, like you rightly said, is an illegal enterprise. And they're shutting as many down as they possibly can. I understand that some of the folks who do this are even, they're doing it, they've got mobility.
Yes.
They're operating out of vehicles, so they're moving periodically. But I understand the point made. And that is, I think we need a lot more investment in infrastructure that will prevent that kind of a thing. And so
is it in infrastructure or in policing these types of?
There's technology that would protect.
I think there's a police unit that also
and also to track them down.
Yes. So the point I am making is that the technology itself can be improved so that the integrity of it is much more difficult to penetrate. That's the point I'm making. But beyond that is the whole sense of how the industry works, in the sense that the players or the service providers thinking, well, we have nothing to do with this. It's the NCC's role, it's the regulator's role to make sure you do everything. But what I have seen, whether it's security, whether it's efficiency, it must always be a joint responsibility. In the best regulated environments, what has happened is that the systems, the governments have found how to promote self-regulation. Look at the United States, for instance. The regulators are not policing players all over the place. They've created the standards, and the regulations, the way they are written, is such that you snooze, you lose. Look at the tax system in the United States. It's your responsibility to come clean, file your taxes. And how many people is the taxman in the United States going to chase all over the place? But they periodically might audit. So you self-regulate. We're going to tell you what the benchmark is. You do it. invest in whatever technology you need to make sure this is not happening. Because when it does, we will penalize you heavily.
So a good prescription that you're basically mentioning here is, if such calls come through your network, there should be some punitive measure.
It's a routing and switching thing.
Exactly.
It's technology. It's
exactly.
routing and switching.
So it comes back to the roles of the telcos. What are you doing to make sure that Nigeria has not only quality of service, but are not being ripped off on a concurrent basis?
You see, before most of these telcos were given licenses, they were all availed the opportunity to see what regulatory system is run by the government or by the regulatory agency. They all read through. Some they provided, some they said when we start, we're going to deliver on this. Now the moment they don't deliver on them, that's why you have the regulators. And that's where the regulators come in. So at the point you now blame whether it's the consumers, that they are never satisfied, or what. But these people read through these outlines before you gave them the license, and they signed the dotted line, and they said they were going to do such. Now, if they are not doing it, that's where the role of the regulator comes in. We must see the regulator playing on the side of the consumer, not on the side of the telcos.
And if he doesn't do that, the CPC comes in, right?
Well, actually, the thing is that
this CPC also needs to be strengthened by the government more, so that they can also bite.
We must also see visible actions from the CPC.
But it's interesting.
To be on the side of the consumer.
You're quietly now being indicted.
I don't even think it's quiet. I think it's pretty loud and apparent indictment. But frankly, and on a very serious note, I mean, I've been Director General at the CPC for slightly over 1 year, and I found two paradoxes. I mean, there's a real paradox there. And sadly, I must admit that consumers in Nigeria don't get a good deal, irrespective of the work the CPC and all the other regulators have done or are doing. So it's still a very, very bad consumer, bad market for consumers.
Bad experience.
It is. I mean, and I wish I could say it wasn't the case, but that's what it is. But by the same token, I would tell you that there are about 260 people at the CPC. Those people come to work every single day, and they work very hard. I didn't know that until I started working there. We work hard every day, fighting issues, resolving complaints, engaging manufacturers and service providers, sometimes even fighting other regulators to do exactly what the name of the organization is, just to protect consumers. And we do a lot, but I admit that the market is still a bad place.
Sorry, sir. 260? I think that's very small. What do you think? For me, just for me, I'm really concerned. What do you think the CPC, the government can do to strengthen the CPC more? Because we need a CPC, not only in the states, in both the local governments, everywhere, so that there should be, and some form of technological advanced way of laying your complaints. I think 260 is really...
No, but what you're saying, I know most likely his response will be, they don't want something that's gawky, you know,
at least
just
overweight. For the past 5 years.
But at the same time, but at the same time, but isn't that where organizations like yours partner with CPC to make sure that consumers are properly educated in all these things that we're talking about?
Over time, we have partnered for some campaigns and what have you, and we have actually clamor and, I mean, let government know that this is just way too small to manage such a big country with 260. We need to be in, perhaps they even need to be in the cloud. Because people that deal with people are really, so these are the things. So
they're making your case for you. But sorry, we got less than three minutes left. There is, I mean, in my discussion with NCC, one of the things that they brought out, also in defense of the telcos. Again, I'm saying defense of the telcos because we made invitations available to them. They just never took us up on them. As a matter of fact, we're going to try so hard now to make sure NCC is on this program with at least 2 or 3 of the operators. And then we'll bring you again. What I'm saying is they are saying that in Abuja, for example, there's never been one base station.
They are defacing the streets, the cities, because
the base stations are defacing the streets.
That's what the FCT minister is
There's
saying.
never been one that was installed in the last 5 years, from what I'm told. So, are we not saying it's partly regulatory, it's partly, you know, the lack of creativity on the part of the telcos to make sure that they have better quality service? Because with better quality service, you get more consumers.
From my experience, I don't think because I'm not a specialist in that area. It's not service not available. It's the quality of service that they provide in drop calls. It's not because there was no service, it's because there are drop calls. Drop calls are not as a result of the fact that there was no network service. From what we see.
Well, the network quality affects the quality of
yes, we also know. But what I'm trying to say is that you can have full service, for example, and they are drop calls. So what I'm trying to say, for example,
there's a congestion issue that multiple base stations will certainly address.
Well, correct.
Well,
but no, you said it rightly. Since you're not an expert in the technical realm of the telcos, yes, the congestion could create the drop calls and all the other things. But what we're saying is that could there not be other creative ways that these telcos, with all the massive monies that they have made
for the past 16 years,
you know,
for consumers, we don't think that's an excuse, because we pay for the service. So we think you should go your way, look for a way to better the service we receive.
Creative.
Then
yes.
Perhaps you've been there for past 16 years. What have you been doing? If there's a problem, negotiate with the government, negotiate with local government, state government, and give us a better solution.
The one additional solution that I think is a nutcracker here is that some of those types of infrastructure deficit, the right of way and some of those types of things, what the telcos and obviously the regulators need to do actually is to partner with the consumers themselves.
Exactly.
So if there's a fidelity between both and there's no mistrust, then there's an opportunity here to compel the
government to shift
the process.
Perhaps they use different people's apartment and what have you. How about that to even have their infrastructure during?
So clearly what I'm hearing everyone saying is that we really do not have excuses for the kind of quality of service that we're getting. That's what I hear. On the side of the summit, ours is to bring people like yourselves together so that we can find solutions to some of these issues. I'm saying very clearly that until the telcos can come clean and tell us exactly what their problems are, not what NCC says, and for NCC to come also onto the show and say, look, we are doing this A, B, C, D, but you can do that better. And then for the Consumer Protection Council, you can say to all of them that you have no excuses as long as you have not done A, B, C, D. So we will really love to thank the three of you. We know quite clearly that this is one episode that just will not go quietly. The main actors are not here, and that's, I'm talking of the 4 networks, including the regulator. So we'll look for the opportunity to continue the discussion, but at the same time, we're particularly very grateful for the great work that CPC is doing. Save Consumers Initiative, thank you, keep it up.
Thank you.
And our brother, Kingsley, we will hear more about your commentary to make sure that things really do go well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No matter how balanced or objective the summit wants to be on this matter, the accusations against the telephone companies are very difficult to dispute because Their flaws are like the rains that do not fall on any one person's house. The irregularities affect every single Nigerian that uses a GSM phone. If it should ever get to a court of law as a case, all Nigerians will appear as witnesses against the telephone companies. When a telephone company in the United States or UK or other societies violate a consumer's right, it is a given that a company makes one form of atonement or the other. So why not in Nigeria? These irregularities seem to have gone on since the inception of GSM in Nigeria over 16 years ago. How much longer before Nigerian consumers begin to compare to their counterparts in the global village? The answer is in strict regulation of the providers by the Nigerian Communications Commission. Except there are commensurate repercussions for violation of rights of consumers, the abuse will continue. I am Shola Ajay. Bye for now.